Was it just a passing glance? Or something deeper? Was it just the flicker of stage lights? Or did something shift the moment their eyes met? There are moments too quiet for the world to notice, but too loud for the heart to ignore. And this is one of them. It was an ordinary night, at least for those watching from afar. The stage buzzed with life, the crowd a sea of waving light sticks, and BTS, as always, shone like constellations moving in rhythm. But there, just behind the shimmer of the spectacle, something else flickered. Something not choreographed, not rehearsed. A story told not in words, but in the silent language of glances and pauses. They were standing side by side, Jungkook and Taehyung, as they so often did. One, the golden Machni with eyes like midnight rivers, sometimes still, sometimes overwhelming. The other, a mystery wrapped in velvet voice and windblown hair. Taehyung with his gaze that always seemed to look just a second too long or end just a moment too soon. And that night, yes, that night, something shifted. It began with laughter. The members were gathered on stage during a fan event in Japan. The air was light, filled with games and banter. Fans cheered as each member teased the other, and the screen behind them played back moments from their earlier rehearsals. And then, the camera panned to Taehyung. He was laughing, his hand briefly resting on the shoulder of a male staff member beside the stage. A shared joke, a casual gesture. But Jungkook, standing just a few steps behind, didn't laugh. His smile faltered, barely noticeable to the untrained eye. But to those who've watched him 1,000 times before, it was enough. His lips parted, as if to say something, then closed. Some fans would later say his eyes shimmered unnaturally under the stage lights. Others believed it was just the brightness, the exhaustion. But many, so many, replayed that moment in slow motion. And in that brief frame, they saw something like sadness. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something else. The scene changed quickly. Music played. The boys danced, posed, waved. But Jungkook was quieter than usual. Was he really crying? Someone asked in the comments of a fan cam uploaded hours later. He wiped his face twice. Was that sweat or tears? ARMY, always observant, split down the middle. Some said it was coincidence. A long day, a tender moment, nothing more. Others watched the moment again and again. Look, they said. Look at how he glances toward Taehyung when he isn't looking. Look at how his posture shifts. It wasn't the first time something like this stirred the fandom. Months before, during a live broadcast, Taehyung had spoken softly about loneliness. His voice steady, his gaze distant. Jungkook had been beside him, silent, listening. When Taehyung said, "Sometimes I just wish someone would listen without trying to fix things," the camera caught Jungkook biting his lip. Moments like these became a tapestry over time, a collection of almosts, of maybes. It's in the way they moved around each other. On camera, they were chaos and chemistry, playful, bold, unforgettable. But off stage, the air around them sometimes shifted. In one behind-the-scenes clip from a 2023 concert rehearsal, Taehyung leans in to whisper something into Jungkook's ear. Whatever he said made Jungkook pause. He didn't laugh. He just looked, and then looked away. It was a blink of silence in a day filled with noise. That's the thing about Jungkook and Taehyung. Their story, if it is a story, is not loud. It exists in the in-between, between lyrics, between breaths. One fan put it best in a forum thread that trended for days. They are like verses from a song that never ends the way you expect. You keep listening, hoping to understand. And that brings us back to that night, the one when Taehyung laughed with someone else, and Jungkook stood just behind him. As the segment ended, Taehyung walked across the stage, high-fiving fans at the edge. Jungkook stayed back, crouched near the speaker, tying his shoelace, or maybe just buying himself a moment. The crowd roared as fireworks sparked above them. But when the camera cut to a wide shot, zooming out across the stage, a single frame caught Jungkook wiping beneath his eye. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't theatrical, it was human. Fans debated endlessly in comment sections, Twitter threads, and long video essays. Was it jealousy? Was it nothing? Was it just two people navigating the weight of their own fame, their friendship, their unspoken language? Maybe he just had something in his eye, some said. Maybe he had everything in his heart, others replied. Still, there was no scandal, no statement, no clarifying message from the company, and that made it feel even more real. Because in real life, people don't always explain their feelings. Sometimes they just feel. In a 2022 interview, when asked about how they support each other, Jungkook answered quietly, "Sometimes you don't have to say anything. Just being there is enough." Taehyung, seated beside him, turned slowly, smiled. "Exactly," he said. A silence followed, a kind of silence that says more than any words ever could. Time passes, moments fade, but for those who felt that heartbeat of sadness on stage that night, it stays. Not as proof of anything, not as gossip, but as a reminder that even in the brightest spotlight, there are shadows, that even among the loudest cheers, there are unspoken fears, and that sometimes the people we admire most are simply trying to figure out how to be human in a world that expects perfection. So when Jungkook wiped his eye that night, maybe it wasn't a tear. Maybe it was the weight of everything he couldn't say. And when Taehyung turned, laughing with someone else, maybe he didn't notice. Or maybe he did. Maybe, in the language they speak with eyes and silence, there was a message passed across the stage, one only they could understand. And us? We can only watch from afar, connecting the dots with shaky hands, drawing poetry out of their glances, painting entire stories from a sigh caught on camera. But perhaps that's the magic of them. Not in the answers, but in the questions they leave behind. We don't know what they felt that night. We don't know what Jungkook wiped away, or why Taehyung laughed when he did. But we know what we saw. Two souls tangled, intertwined, existing in a world that watches them too closely, yet never close enough. A friendship, a connection, a question, and maybe, just maybe, a kind of love that defies definition. They say that memories are stitched into time by emotion, and that's why, even now, fans remember that particular fan meeting, not because of what was said, but because of what was felt. The moment was brief, too brief, but some silences echo longer than applause. Weeks passed, promotions continued, performances dazzled, the world moved on. But for a corner of the fandom, for those who noticed the crack in Jungkook's expression, the unguarded warmth in Taehyung's smile towards someone else, something lingered. Clips resurfaced. One in particular, taken backstage after the show, caught Jungkook sitting alone in the dressing room, earbuds in, head down. He wasn't crying. He wasn't talking. He was just still. And Taehyung? He entered the room minutes later, glanced once at Jungkook, then crossed the space quietly. No big gestures, no playful voice, just a hand placed gently on Jungkook's shoulder. That touch, simple, soft, said more than any hug or sentence ever could. And Jungkook, he looked up, their eyes met, and the camera, positioned too far to catch expressions clearly, only captured that moment before they turned away. Two shadows folding back into each other, like waves retreating into the sea. At a later live stream, one that fans now look back on with teary nostalgia, a fan commented, "Jungkook, are you okay? You've been quiet lately." Jungkook read it aloud. He smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting, but his eyes looked like they were searching for something. And then, as if brushing it off, he said softly, "I'm okay. Sometimes I just feel things deeply, that's all." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to, because ARMY knows. Jungkook has always been the kind of person who laughs loudly, loves quietly, and carries storms behind his eyes. One of the most talked about moments following that period happened during an overseas schedule. Taehyung and Jungkook were spotted arriving separately, an unusual sight considering their long history of side-by-side arrivals. No big drama, no obvious distance, just space. But fans who watched closely noticed that in group interactions, Jungkook seemed less present, laughing at the right times, nodding along, but not quite there. And then, during a break between interviews, Taehyung walked past the crew to sit beside Jungkook. He didn't say anything. Instead, he pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and turned it toward them both. "Selfie?" he asked. Jungkook hesitated, then smiled, softly, tiredly. But it was real. And when the shutter clicked, fans noticed something else. Taehyung wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at Jungkook. Time passed.
The narrative faded from public conversation, as most things do. New performances, new content, new headlines pulled everyone in new directions. But then came the documentary release. In one scene, brief, easily missed, Jungkook was talking with the director during a break in filming. The subject? Emotions, expression, artistry. And in his usual reflective way, he said, "When I sing, I think about things I never say. That's why sometimes it gets too much." The director asked, "Like what kind of things?" Jungkook paused. Then, "The moments you miss. The people you care about, but don't know how to talk to sometimes." He looked down, and the feeling that maybe they feel the same. Many armies couldn't help but draw a line, a thread, between that confession and everything else. Because no matter how much time passes, there are certain bonds that seem to resist unraveling. Taehyung and Jungkook have always had that energy, not constant, not loud, but present. There's a clip, treasured by fans, where Taehyung is asked during an interview, "What kind of person do you go to when you're struggling?" He thinks for a moment, then says, "Someone who knows how to just sit with me." He doesn't name anyone. He doesn't have to. In the months that followed, their closeness seemed to return in new ways. Small moments. Jungkook waiting for Taehyung before getting into the van. Taehyung adjusting Jungkook's mic on stage. Their voices harmonizing in V-Live karaoke sessions late at night. Each act a quiet reminder. Connection doesn't disappear. It changes shape. Some fans began calling their relationship a constellation, always there, even when hidden by clouds. Others simply said, "It's not our story to define. We're just lucky to witness it." And maybe that's what makes all of this so hauntingly beautiful. The not knowing, the gray space between longing and friendship, between sadness and love, between what we imagine and what really is. In the end, it wasn't about whether Jungkook cried because Taehyung spoke with someone else. It wasn't about confirming or denying what they mean to each other. It was about seeing two people navigate a bond under the weight of the world's eyes. A bond that has no label, only feeling. So now, when you see them on stage, sharing a smile, a touch, a song, look closer. Look at how their bodies lean slightly toward each other when they laugh. Look at how they remember each other's coffee orders, finish each other's sentences. Look at how they never quite stop looking. This isn't a fairy tale. It's not a romance drama. It's real life. And in real life, sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we never fully understand. We don't know what Jungkook felt that night. We don't know why Taehyung laughed when he did. But we know this. Some people find each other once in a lifetime. And whether it's friendship, soul connection, or something more subtle than language allows, it matters. It matters to them. And somehow, it matters to us too. So now we ask you, what did you see that night? Was it a fleeting emotion, or something deeply rooted beneath years of shared stages and quiet conversations? Tell us what you think. Was it just friendship, or something more? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because in the end, every interpretation tells us something, not about them, but about ourselves. And maybe that's the real story unfolding here.